guys, welcome to Word on Wednesday. Sean and I are going to have a discussion that you are welcome to be a part of. If you hear anything that piques your interest, please feel free to leave a comment. We would love to see what you're thinking about God's Word. We are going to be walking through the book of Joshua for the next several weeks. And so, again, we would just love to have you participate and be part of this with us. We're going to be uploading a video every single Wednesday morning. And the goal of this is just to give the church an opportunity to have another resource to learn from God's Word. We're going to focus a little bit more in the Old Testament, and so we're going to talk, and then once in a while we're going to invite other people to be a part. So if you would ever like to join us here in the studio and do this walking through with us, we would love to have you. But today we're going to jump into Joshua chapter 1. What's up, Sean?
Not a whole lot. This is one of my favorite stories. It's so relevant to most of the New Testament. I'm excited to get into this with you guys.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we're gonna read through this today and kind of see how it goes, and then in the future we might not do a read through every time, but that's how we're going to start out today. So, Joshua chapter 1. I'm reading from the NLT today. After the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant. He said, Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore, the time has come for you to lead these people, the Israelites, across the Jordan River, into the land I am giving them. I promise you what I promised Moses. Wherever you set foot, you will be on land I have given you, from the Negev wilderness in the south to the Lebanon mountains in the north, from the Euphrates River in the east to the Mediterranean Sea in the west, including all of the land of the Hittites. No one will be able to stand against you as long as you live, for I will be with you as I was with Moses. I will not fail you or abandon you. Be strong and courageous, for you are the one who will lead these people to possess all the land I swore to their ancestors I would give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the instructions Moses gave you. Do not deviate from them, turning either to the right or to the left. Then you will be successful in everything you do. Study this book of instruction continually. Meditate on it day and night, so you will be sure to obey everything written in it. Only then will you prosper and succeed in all you do. This is my command. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. All right, so that's a good start here. Kind of an introduction to the book. What jumps out to you from the first part of that chapter?
Joshua.
Yeah. Who is he?
So you look at Joshua, and because names are a very important thing. Joshua is a translation from ancient Hebrew, right? But it's the exact same name as Jesus, which is translated from Aramaic to Koine Greek to Latin to, it just kept kind of changing throughout time. And to differentiate them, there was kind of a conscious choice to make Joshua closer to the original language. I find it incredible that God chose a man with the same name to lead these people from a place of wandering, a place of, they had been captives for so long. And he said, I want you to follow this man into the promised land, just like we're supposed to follow Jesus. But like our following of Jesus, it's not easy. Mm-hmm. They get across this river, and it's just fight after fight. Yeah. But as we get a little bit further in here, it'll talk about that this is a place of peace, despite the fact that this is something that we continue to have to fight for. So, Joshua's name is the first thing that sticks out to me. If you haven't read the previous book, it was a long journey for Moses. Yeah. Bringing them out of captivity, getting up to the Red Sea, getting through this water, wandering through the desert, dealing with problem after problem after problem. And this is stuff that Joshua didn't have to see.
Yeah.
I mean, Joshua was only alive for part of that, and he missed out on, a good portion of the beginning of it. So I also find it interesting that Joshua is the one that is chosen to go across into this new land, but not the people that had been in Egypt.
Yeah.
That they were setting it up for this next generation. So then it gets me thinking about my children, right? I have been in Egypt, and I don't want my kids to have to go through Egypt. So I want to get them across the river so that they can be in a better place. Yeah. Not that it's easier, but in a different place, that they're not in bondage.
Yeah. I think it's like you said, why Joshua was chosen. Now, I'm not exactly sure at what point he became Moses' assistant. Definitely would not have been alive for very long when they were in Egypt. I'm not sure. Was he one? He might have been one of the 12 spies that were chosen to go spy out at the very beginning after they crossed through the Red Sea.
Is it Joshua that is the assistant, or is it Nun was the assistant?
No, it was Joshua.
Joshua was the assistant?
Yeah. Because Joshua was there when the 10 Commandments were given. He went up onto the mountain with Moses. So I think he was with him most of the time in the wilderness.
I mean, we've got some young men here that they just show up.
That's right.
So I mean, if you have the willingness to show up and to be a part of something, you get kind of brought in, you're
right.
kept close.
Well, and that's the whole idea of mentorship and discipleship. And we see that over and over again throughout the Bible, where God wants to take men who are a little bit more mature, have a little bit more mileage, and then they will surround them with younger men who have energy and excitement, but they need to be stewarded and directed and guided a little bit. And Joshua had that. But what jumps out at me here is Joshua has always been the number 2. And that could be a comfortable place to be, because he's ultimately not the one having to make decisions. He's not the one who's having to hear from God directly and then lead the people. But now God says, Moses, my servant, is dead. So in other words, you can't rely on him anymore to be the guy.
And just throw him straight into the fire.
That's right. That was probably a pretty intimidating place to be. I remember when I took over this church 12 and a half years ago, I'd always been in a number 2 role my entire ministry experience, whether it was, serving as an intern or being a college pastor or even being an associate pastor. I still always had somebody else who kind of the buck stopped with them, so to speak. They had the full responsibility. But when I stepped into that role, it felt like a whole new weight, a whole new dynamic that I was walking into. As Moses' assistant, Joshua did have some pretty cool training opportunities. He got to go up onto the mountain with him and see the splendor of God in a way that nobody else did. He was there. Joshua was the one fighting the campaigns down on the battlefield when Moses' arms were being lifted up by, I can never remember who the other 2 were that were lifting his arms. But Joshua was the one that was taking the orders and leading the battle and doing those things. So God really had prepared him thoroughly for this opportunity. But now it's happening.
And not just that, but you've got all of the conflicts and stuff that Moses was constantly dealing with just with the Hebrew people.
Yeah, that's right.
So he would have had all kinds of experience of, dealing with the day-to-day life side of it too, where it's not just the big stuff, but it's the small stuff. I mean, it was kind of like a big internship.
Yeah.
A wild internship, but you have to be prepared for all of these different situations. Mm-hmm. So he had such an advantage compared to Moses, jumping into it. But then he had an advantage over some of the other Hebrew people because he hadn't necessarily had to have spent all of that time in Egypt like they did.
Yeah. Well, and I think it also shows us that number one, we should always be aware that God has us where we're at for a reason. You know, there was probably a lot of times where Joshua may have thought to himself, you know, I don't really love having to follow this guy around all the time and be his servant and take care of him. But then when it came time to lead, I'm sure he was so thankful that he had that opportunity, you know, to be that right-hand guy. You know, we never think, oh man, I really want to be the assistant someday. We always look at the person who has the assistant as the person that we typically want to emulate or be like. But in reality, we should all be open to being that assistant, because we don't ever know when God's going to call us up to that place of leadership where we're going to need to know everything that He's been trying to show us over the time.
And if you look at the two, you know, it's, do you want to be in Moses' shoes going into Egypt, or do you want to be in Joshua's shoes going into Israel? And it's, you know, it arguably a little bit scarier going into Israel than it was going back to Egypt.
Yeah.
But he's doing it with thousands of people, you know, behind his back, whereas Moses is going in there with his brother.
Right.
It's me and Aaron, let's do this.
Absolutely.
And, you know, so it's better if you can have that built-up team. Mm-hmm. You know, so there are other people there to kind of like lean into. And at this point, he has seen the way Moses has talked with all of these other leaders, right? You've got, you know, the Aaron's sons and stuff are there. You know, there's other people there to kind of talk to about this and go, hey, are we doing this the right way? Are we not doing this the wrong way? And it, you know, just really shows that we can accomplish so much more in numbers than we can if we're going off by ourselves.
And man, that is something that's so lost, I think, in the culture today, especially in some of the younger generations, because we have so much information available at our fingertips. You know, if we want to know something, we can watch a YouTube video or find a TikTok video for 60 seconds that explains something, and we think, oh, now I'm an expert. You know, and I've noticed that people don't ask for advice the way that they used to. Or if they do, it doesn't hold the same amount of weight to them. You know, when I was first training and preparing for ministry 22 years ago, man, anytime I had an opportunity to speak with a pastor or someone that was in a leadership position, it was such an honor, and I was excited to hear what they had to say. And it feels like we're losing some of that. And not that we want to put people in exalted positions, but like you said, it's understanding the value of getting that godly counsel and adding to the knowledge that we already have.
Well, when you're younger, you look at wealth as being this thing that's a monetary thing.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you get older, you know, you start hitting your 30s, and then you realize that wealth isn't money, it's how many of the guys do you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, what kind of guys do you got in your life? I'm like, I got a car guy, I got a carpenter guy, I've got an electricity guy. You know, I have all of these guys, these people, these valuable people in my life, and that's kind of how you judge wealth. But we've strayed away from that.
Yeah.
I don't need a guy. I got YouTube.
Yeah.
I'm a professional carpenter now. I watched a YouTube video on dovetails. Still can't do it, but you know.
Right. Or I'm going to try to do it, and there's nothing wrong with trying to do things on your own.
No.
But sometimes we get ourselves into trouble because we refuse to ask for help. So I'm going to make this happen, and then we make a mess of things, and then we have to call in the cavalry. Yeah. You know, and it's not until things are at disaster level that we're actually willing to ask for help.
And we could have just asked for help in the beginning.
Yeah. So he says to Joshua, now is the time. The time has come for you to lead these people across the Jordan. You know, a couple of years ago, we did a celebration at our church because we hit our 40-year anniversary as a congregation. And we made this declaration that God was taking us through the Jordan River. And I still believe 2 years later that was what God was doing, was he was transitioning us as a church from one place into something new, into a new direction that he was taking us. And what we see here is Israel, they're going to have to think of themselves now in a completely different way. For 430 years, they were slaves. You know, they were servants of Pharaoh in Egypt, and life was very predictable, everything happened the same way year in and year out, and they knew what to expect. Then things transitioned with Moses, and they found themselves a free people, but living in a difficult way in this land of the wilderness. And so they would travel around, and sometimes they'd be in a location for a day, sometimes they'd be in a location for years, but they were always moving around. But God was providing them with meat, with manna. He was always making sure that there was water for them, and miraculously sometimes God would provide.
It always kind of made me think of like the welfare system.
Huh.
I mean, you look at the way that the Hebrew people lived in Egypt, and food was provided,
Yeah.
housing was provided, clothing was provided. All they had to do was work.
Yeah.
Right, the perfect communist system there in
Yeah.
Egypt.
Making bricks. Sounds like Bernie Sanders.
But as they transition out, they're like, well, now I have to rely on God.
Yeah.
And not saying that the welfare is bad, for everybody across the board. It's meant to be a tool to get you from one place to another.
Right. Not to just live there.
Exactly. And you start to see some of these people, and it makes sense why you have people now that could get off welfare, and they don't want to.
Yeah.
And you see it there when they're like, well, I don't want to have to trust God for this. I don't want to have to trust that things are getting better, even though I can see that they're getting better. I don't want to have to trust it because I knew for sure I was going to get that check on the first of the month.
Right.
I knew for sure I was going to get those food stamps. I knew for sure that I was going to get these programs.
Yeah.
And we have to be willing to say yes to God and to move where He is telling us to move.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't have faith, then we're kind of stuck in Egypt.
That's right. Well, I mean, and that's a great point, because there's something about the human psyche that we really love security. We can worship predictability, and at this point, hey, you're going to cross the Jordan into the land that I'm giving you. And I think there are so many times where God is calling us to cross a Jordan, and that can be metaphorical for all kinds of different situations in our lives. Maybe He's calling us into a new career. Maybe He's asking us to trust Him, to take a risk, to do something we've not done before. Maybe it's serving in a new capacity, or it can be any number of things that He's pulling on our heart, and we can be so resistant to that because, man, yeah, I want to go into the promise, but what does that mean? What's that going to look like?
And even if you go back a little bit and you look at the spies that went over,
Yeah.
and they're like, well, I saw the other side. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
It's scary. And then you get the couple there that are like, I think that we can do this.
Mm-hmm. Joshua is one of them.
Exactly. So it's sometimes kind of what you're going to get into, and you just have to be willing to say, you know what? This is scary.
Yeah.
This is going to be terrifying. This is going to be hard. This is going to be whatever. But I know that God is for me. So who can be against me?
Yeah. Well, and God speaks to that. He says to Joshua, I promise you what I promised Moses. That's a huge thing. But there again, it shows us that we cannot rely on someone else's relationship with God. So as I'm moving forward in my spiritual growth, I can't rely on my mentors. I can't rely on my elders. I can't rely on my friends' spiritual growth. I have to have my own. And so what Joshua was being told here was, hey, I said these things to Moses, but you need to know for yourself these things that I said to Moses. It's not enough that Moses knew them and was able to lead. Now you need to know them and have that deep level of conviction and trust and faith that I'm going to do the same thing for you.
Hey, so if you were enjoying this little segment with Pastor Tanner and I going through our journey through this wonderful book, join us next week. Every week we're going to be doing this. Look forward to spending some time with you. Don't forget to ask some questions so we can go through them together.